Hey YouTube, how's it going? Kevin Cleary here with a knife video for you. Today we are going to take a look at the Chris Reeve Knives Large Inkosi. Now this is an interesting knife and kind of a special knife for one big reason, and that is the balance that this knife is able to strike. And very few other knives are able to do this in the same way. And so I want to ask you now to kind of notice that as we go through the video, and I'll try to point it out as we go along. But the thing that impresses me most about this knife is just the versatility and the balance of it. Okay, so first off, let me say by way of introduction, this is sort of a newer offering from Chris Reeve Knives. It is replacing the Sebenza 25. It still certainly has that Sebenza 21 look, even that original Sebenza look to it. So you're going to look at this and go, yeah, that's definitely a Chris Reeve knife. And I do appreciate that. I think that's something that they needed to do. You don't want to get into the Porsche Cayenne problem where people looked at the Porsche Cayenne and were like, dude, that's not a Porsche, okay? And I don't think you want to depart so far if you're Chris Reeve Knives that people look at it and go, yeah, that's not a Chris Reeve knife. You kind of lose your hardcore fan base. And yet you still want to do things right, and you still want to offer enough innovation that you draw new people in. And so I want to ask the question of whether or not this knife does that. And I think it can if people will kind of open their minds a little bit. And hopefully that video will help with this just a little. So size and weight on this. And again, guys, balance is going to be the key. Size and weight on this knife, it's 8 7/16 inches, so just under 8.5 inches. Blade length is 3 9/16, so again, just over 3.5 inches. 4 3/4 on the handle. In fact, it's just a little over that. Just under 1/2 inch thick, and 4.9 ounces. Now I said balance and versatility would be the key here. When it comes to carrying this knife, you get a knife that is not too big, okay? It's not too small. It's not crazy heavy. It is slim enough that it carries nicely in pocket. And I've carried this in dress pants and jeans and work pants, and it works just fine no matter what I'm wearing. And so again, the size and weight just picks up on that theme of balance and really does a great job here. By the way, notice that this is supposed to be a hard use knife. By Chris Reeve's own admission, this is supposed to be their sort of heavy duty folder, and it comes in under 5 ounces, which kind of challenges that notion that a hard use knife, you know, has to be 6 or 7 or 8 or 10 ounces like the Cold Steel 4MAX, all right? And I would suggest this knife is maybe even more heavily built than a lot of those knives that do come in at 6 or 7 ounces. So we'll see some of those things moving forward, beginning with the blade, which is where we want to go next. So let's look at this blade. We've got S35VN steel, drop point with a shallow hollow grind. Chris Reeve calls it a large hollow grind. Shallow hollow grind is what I'm going to call it. You've got those famous Chris Reeve thumb studs, a bit of jimping, very nice crowned spine. Notice how much material it's able to carry out to the tip. So remember I said balance. This knife is able to have a lot of strength out at the tip. It's able to have a lot of material through the whole blade while still cutting really well. If you want to go slice up a tomato, this will absolutely do the job for you. The blade stock is not crazy thick. It's only 140 thousandths. It is 20 thousandths behind the edge, which is really nice. And yet, while they've got those numbers, you know, again, guys, this is like a Goldilocks blade, okay? It's just right. It's thin enough that it slices well, and yet it's designed and ground in such a way that it's very strong and robust and durable. And so that's what, over and over again, you're gonna hear me say that about this knife. And that's what really, I think, makes this knife shine in the knife industry overall. And what I think can draw people to this knife is just, man, they get a lot of stuff just right, like the blade, okay? I'm not in love with the stonewash finish, although I'm not sure how. I don't know. A satin finish I feel like would look really nice and maybe contrast with the handle a little bit more, but the stonewash is gonna be a little more durable and not gonna show as much wear over time. So, you know, the blade is a great example of being tough, durable, and slicey all at the same time. And so, gotta say, big fan of the way they've done this blade. Moving on to the action here. Lockup and deployment, if you will. The lock is, of course, a titanium frame lock. The tension on here is fairly high. Let's take a look at some of the details. Okay, so we've got this nice blue thumb stud here that we're all used to seeing. The thumb stud is probably my least favorite part. It's not a total failure, but I feel like the angle here is just a little too steep so that there's a potential that my thumb wants to slide off this. So I feel like this would be improved by one of two things. Either one, make this tip a little wider so I've got more of a flat surface to push against, or make the ridges on that little pyramid just a little bit sharper so it catches my thumb. Otherwise though, it's definitely very workable. Now this is not a knife that you're gonna sort of flick out the way maybe you're used to. It can do that. Whoops. There you go. So you can see the knife can flick out, but it's not really made with that in mind. It's made to open and close smoothly and easily, and that it definitely does. Now, a couple points that are pretty interesting here. Look at the sides of those washers. Now, you're going to get a better look when we talk about construction. I will put in a video here of me having the knife totally open, and I'll make some points about that when we get there. The other thing I want to point out here is, I don't know if we're going to be able to see this, at least not very easily. There you go. You can, well, kind of see it. There you go. You can kind of see the top of the little ceramic ball that's inserted into the end of the lock bar here. So the way that works is it's that ceramic ball that actually interfaces with the tang of the knife. So you have ceramic on steel, a very, very durable, very long-lasting type of interface there. That ball also serves as the detent. Okay, so kind of ingenious, you know, and I've got to say, I like the fact they looked at a problem. All right, there's a potential that a titanium frame lock will wear overly quickly. Now, Chris Reeve has a great warranty, and you could have always sent it away to have that taken care of, but everyone else was doing a stainless steel lock bar insert, and that's a great option, okay? Especially the companies that go to even a nicer steel like D2 or something like that and make it even that much more durable. Chris Reeve looked at the problem and they still solved it, but they did it in an interesting way with that nice little ceramic ball that serves dual purpose. And I've got to say, I respect that. The washers, again, are very big and very stable. Now, here's one of those points about being hard use, okay? We've got a pretty stiff lock bar tension here, and then we've got those large washers that make the knife very, very stable. And to me, that's one of the things that hard use knives often miss. I have tons of knives that are claiming to be, you know, heavy duty and durable and strong that don't have nearly the surface area in contact that this knife does, and haven't thought it out as well as this knife has. And again, you'll see how those washers are done in a couple of minutes when we get to construction, and you can see the knife opened up. It's pretty darn impressive. While we're talking about that, let's take a quick look at the stop pin. Look at the sides of that big, thick stop pin. And I can't tell you how many knives I have that are supposed to be hard use and heavy duty and tactical that have a little tiny stop pin that looks like a wire they took from a coat hanger. And that, you know, that adds to the longevity of the knife. It adds to the overall strength of the knife. And the same is true of the pivot. And again, you'll see how big this pivot is when you see the knife opened up. So in terms of lockup and deployment, I guess we should also talk about how easy it is. The lock bar tension is pretty stiff on here, but they've given us a nice good bit of access. So while you have to push fairly hard on this lock bar, it's easy enough to access that it's not a big deal. So lockup and deployment, it's different than what you're used to experiencing. Maybe if you're, you know, you got a bunch of ZTs and you're used to that really stiff detent with the bearing pivot. It's not this, okay? It's not meant to be this, but it is still very smooth. It's still very confidence inspiring. You know, when you close this, it just feels like an extremely high level of precision. And that's something that I think a lot of people really appreciate. Certainly, I can appreciate. So the next thing we want to talk about is the construction and the ergonomics on this guy. So this, of course, is a titanium frame lock. We're pretty much used to that. You can see single position clip. The clip has been moved up so that it lands on the frame of the knife rather than on the lock bar. I really think that's a nice touch. Another change that they've made is the way they do the stop pin here. So instead of having the 2 screws coming in, this stop pin is only secured by the 1 screw on this side. And actually, you could take the knife apart, okay? You could take everything out of this side and lift this scale off from that stop pin. It just slides in there. It's not exactly free spinning, but it kind of is. And, you know, I don't know, you could debate about that. I kind of like the idea of having a screw here and having this as sort of an extra locating point. But really, the precision on this is so tight that once you get this in place, everything's going to come together really, really well. Now, I do want to take a second and roll in the sort of the takedown video that I've got. So let's go ahead and take a look at this knife taken apart, and I'll show you some of the features that I've been talking about up to this point. Hey guys, want to quickly show you a couple things while I have the Inkosi apart for cleaning. Just want to show you what makes this knife truly heavy duty and hard use, and it's easier to see when it's opened up. So first off, take a look at the washers. The way they've done those washers is really, really impressive. They've got these openings in them that are going to do 2 things. 1, they're going to hold lubricant. 2, they're going to reduce the surface area. And 3, they allow you to make this very large washer. Now, this is something that I've often seen on a knife that's supposed to be hard use and heavy duty. A good example is a zero tolerance 0300. If you look in there, in terms of side to side stability on the blade, you've got a little tiny washer, barely bigger than just the inside piece of this washer. Okay, and that is not going to be stable for long periods of time. It's just an inherent weak point. All right. While we're looking at that, again, take a look at the size of the stop pin. I can't tell you how many times I've had knives that are marketed as hard use, heavy duty knives that have a stop pin that is, you know, this size. All right. Now, I'm not for a second arguing that they haven't done any kind of testing and that, you know, a piece of metal this big when it's only spanning, you know, hold on, there we go. When it's only spanning a short distance like that isn't strong. It is strong. But compared to this, no. All right. Same with the pivot here. Look at the size of that pivot. Look at the size of the screw and the threading that are being used here. I guess the bolt and the threading that are being used. You know, that's going to be a heavy duty part of the knife, and it's going to last forever. It's just going to last forever. And so those are the kind of things I just wanted to point out while we've got this open. The other cool thing is if you take a look back here at the standoff at the back of the knife, you can drop the washer. You can again see that it's very well built and that it's going to locate these 2 handles. So it kind of locks in as you're, without screwing anything down on this knife, when you put it together, it ends up, you have already kind of locked the knife into place before you've even tightened a single screw. So just one other little component there that's worth noticing on the Inkosi. Now let's go back and continue with the together portion of the review. Okay, so there you go, guys. You've kind of seen what the knife looks like taken apart, and I hope now you're beginning to appreciate what I'm saying about this knife being perhaps more overbuilt than most knives that claim to be overbuilt. Even though it weighs less than they do, it takes up less pocket space than they do, and it has a knife that cuts better than they do, all right? So that's where this knife really, really shines. There's an attention to detail and a level of thoughtfulness that is not common, okay? It's really, really well done. And so like we've been saying, guys, this knife kind of does things just right. Is it overbuilt? Is it heavy duty? Is it hard use? Absolutely. But it's all of those things without weighing 10 ounces and being a giant pocket hog that makes it onerous to carry around and in some cases even to use. All right, so pretty darn impressive. And I think you can see now why I'm pretty impressed with this knife from a construction standpoint. Now, in terms of ergonomics, that's a thing where I'm going to have a couple little issues. Now, one, it does lock into hand pretty well. The jimping is very, very good. Okay, the jimping is another one of those areas where I'd say this knife really gets it just right. Like, it's not so sharp that it's hurting your finger, but it's sharp enough that it's definitely confidence inspiring. The bead blasted finish on these knives definitely adds a lot of grip. I've had tons of stainless steel knives, and I mean tons of titanium knives that just have a plain finish here, and they can feel a little bit slick. This one definitely not. It feels very, very secure in hand, and I think even the choils help with that. Now, in terms of ergonomics, the one issue that I do have here is it's maybe not the most comfortable knife in hand. It's certainly not bad. There's no major hot spots, but it's just not amazing. All right. The other thing is the distance that the blade here has to your finger. I like to see knives that allow me to get just a little bit closer to the base of the blade. So if this was kind of angled up a bit and I could get my finger somewhere around here, I would appreciate that a little bit more. As I'm fond of saying, it's not the end of the world, but it is one of those little ergonomic points that I tend to prefer for my uses. All right. So ergonomics, overall, it's fairly comfortable. Construction, of course, is where this knife really shines, and the construction here is absolutely stellar. All right, let's go ahead and get to some comparisons. I have purposely brought in more comparisons than I usually do because of the fact that this knife does beg the question, you know, aren't there other more modern folders that are doing what Chris Reeve started, but in a better way than Chris Reeve? And I don't know. Let's bring in some cheaper ones first of all. I mean, cheaper than this, not cheap. But here is a zero tolerance 0560. I think this is definitely one of the better production folders on the market. And it is cheaper than the Sebenza, but it does a couple of things that maybe are not as good. You know, the blade is probably not quite as well balanced. Certainly it's fairly ergonomic, maybe even a little more ergonomic. The bearings definitely kind of question whether you can call this a hard use knife or not. But overall, yeah, it's a pretty darn good knife. And certainly if you are saying, man, I'd love a really nice titanium frame lock, but man, those Chris Reeves are too much, this might be a good option. Let's pull in a couple other options for you that may be a little more budget friendly. So here is the Real Steel Megalodon. This is available in all titanium, does have the titanium frame lock, and this is gonna be probably, well, I don't know, it's gonna be close to one of the cheaper knives that I'm showing you. Let's grab another one here. This knife I haven't had too long. This is the Kaiser Escort Pinkerton design. And this is going to be a pretty budget-friendly titanium frame lock as well. Still pretty well built. It is on bearings. It is a flipper, which I know is more like what we're used to seeing from these kind of knives. And these can be had for, you know, well under $200. Maybe, I don't know, $150 or something like that. And for that price, they're pretty darn good. Now, let's bring in some other comparisons that are maybe more in the price category of the Sebenza. Here, of course, is my Riot Knives Torrent, and this is sort of, to me, this is the quintessential modern folder. It has all the innovations. It's got, you know, dual row ceramic bearings. It's got a perfectly dialed in detent. It's got the lock bar insert the way that we're kind of used to seeing. You've got some nice anodized titanium on there. You've got a little bit of extra millwork from the CNC machine, M390 steel. Really, really nice blade. It's good, but it's almost like Riot just did what the market was telling them to do, where Chris Reeve said, you know, I know what people want, but let's see if we can do it in a way that's really our own, okay? And I think that's one of the things that's pretty impressive about this knife. Now, let's throw in a few others. Here is the Hinderer, and I may do a whole video comparing these two because both of these are marketed as hard use, heavy duty knives, and I think both of them really are. And I would even argue again that both of these do some things really well that even some of the modern hard use folders are not able to pull off. Now here's a knife that I would put in a similar vein in terms of size, weight, and carry, certainly not as heavily built. So if you really like the swish, and I love the swish, it's a beautiful design. I love the blade shape. I love this handle. I love the ergonomics. Really, really nice knife. In terms of quality and fit and finish and utility, the Sebenza will hang with it all day. In fact, you know, if, I don't know, you said, let's go for a hike in the woods, you've got to take one knife. I would take this over this every single time. All right, so there is a level of utility that the Chris Reeve brings. Here's a Koenig Arius. Again, beautiful knife, wonderfully finished, very balanced, lightweight, ergonomic, excellent, excellent modern folder. Now you're going to pay considerably more for this than this, and you're going to get some interesting things, right? You're going to get that dialed in detent. You're going to get that nice drop shut feel. You're going to get an interesting design that's maybe a little more, let's say this is a pretty traditional knife design, and this maybe isn't so much. And that may be something you find very appealing. One other knife here, that is the Curtis F3. And again, I put these in sort of a similar vein. Now, you know, there are definitely some differences, and in some cases, you know, when I'm picking on the hard use, tactical type of knife, this is kind of what I'm thinking about. That said, you know, I love this knife. I find it to be one of the favorites in my collection. But again, you know, the Sebenza really, really does a great job, even hanging with this knife, which is going to be, you know, a good few $100s, maybe a couple $100 or $150 more than the Inkosi. All right, so those are some comparisons for you. I tried to put in more than I normally do, just because that's one of the things one of the accusations people make about Chris Reeve knives is, hey, there's a bunch of other knives out there that do a better job at offering a high-end production knife than Chris Reeve does. And I'm just not so sure about that, because just about every one of those is going to lack a little bit in terms of the utility that this knife brings. Okay, so that's where this knife really, truly shines. So overall, guys, who is this knife for? This is a knife for anyone who wants a great balance between quality and precision and attention to detail, and a knife that you can still feel comfortably using, you know, for camping or hiking, or, you know, even throw this in your pocket if you're going hunting. I wouldn't go and skin a deer with it or anything, but, you know, as your backup knife that you can use for, you know, whittling or whatever else that you might need to do in the bush, or some lighter cutting tasks on the carcass that you may need to do. Absolutely. And so that's where I think this knife really shines. The other area where I think this is absolutely impressive is this knife is the true definition of hard use. When you know, zero tolerance, let's bring in the ZT for a second here. When ZT claims to be built like a tank, they're definitely well built, but there are things going on with this knife that mean it's going to fail before this one, okay? Things like the bearing pivot, things like the stop pin. Now this has, of course, the extra stop pins that are going to be more durable, but there are tons of knives out there that claim to be heavy duty that don't have stop pins like this. Okay, the precision on this, the fit and finish on this is just outstanding, and the simplicity of it. And so for all of those reasons, I think this is a great knife. And if you're wanting something that is going to last forever, if you're wanting something that's going to be easy to carry, that's going to be, you know, comfortable and attractive in a suit or in a pair of jeans, you know, there are very few knives that are going to do as well as this one does. Now, some of the knives on the table I think would also fit that role. But man, this is a pretty well done, pretty thoughtful, and pretty interesting knife. I hope you enjoyed the video. I'd love to hear your comments down below. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will talk to you soon.